Well, welcome to everybody who's been able to join us here at our lunch break. And I hope that we'll be able to spend a little bit of time sharing about the idea of accompaniment and accompaniment in the Proclaim movement. So I'm here with Josh. Thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time to be here. And I apologize again for all of the technical difficulties. What's really funny, guys, is that we had a bunch of technical difficulties. It started to work about 5 minutes before 12:30, and we're like, yes, the Holy Spirit is on. And then he just decided to kind of knock us out a little bit. Talking about accompaniment. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about what the church has said about accompaniment and a couple of quotes that we found really useful and meaningful in Evangelii Gaudium, the letter from Pope Francis. And then we're going to talk a little bit some of the ways we want to accompany each and every one of you and how you can accompany others in Proclaim. And then I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the current events too, because it's hard to not address them, particularly when many of us are impacted by it. It's in the news. It's it's very public facing, and it's all over. So we're all over the media. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. So accompaniment. I want to start first, Josh, by throwing out a quick quote from Evangelii Gaudium. It's paragraph 169. If you want to jump along, and for those of you who are curious, you can either pick it up hard copy as Josh has it, or you can get it digitally online. And here's what our Holy Father says about accompaniment. In a culture paradoxically suffering from anonymity and at the same time obsessed with the details of other people's lives, shamelessly given over to morbid curiosity, the church must look more closely and sympathetically at others whenever necessary. The church will have to initiate everyone, priests, religious, laity, into this art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. I love that. I love the last part of that, speaking on how accompaniment really is about recognizing that the other person, the person that's in front of us, their heart, their soul, their being, their lives is sacred. And that's how God sees it. And the opportunity that we have to accompany another person. Mm-hmm. Josh, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a powerful turn of a phrase, as Pope Francis is so wont to do. He has a way of just giving images that drive home ideas. And it's interesting, but when we think about evangelization and the desire to transmit a message to people, if we were to lose focus, we might think of people almost as projects, almost like computers or robots. So we just want to kind of tweak and make sure they have all the right kind of ideas or understandings or the right positions and whatnot. And Pope Francis reminds us of really the sacredness of the other, the fact that every person is in God's image, and how we have to have a position of humble service and love towards the other person. And so I just love that, taking off the sandals before the sacred ground of the other. It reminds us of, in Exodus, Moses removing his sandals because he's on holy ground. And to think of others like that is a powerful thing. What's kind of neat is as I was preparing for this webinar a little bit, I was looking up, this accompaniment word, you hear it a lot since Pope Francis, came into office. And I was like, I wonder how people use the word before. Is it just brand new? And it's interesting, but it was used kind of in association with pairings of foods before. It's like, oh, you know what? Salad is maybe a great accompaniment to I don't know, souvlaki or whatever,
Yeah.
And maybe red wine is a great pairing with a certain kind of meat. And definitely not what we're talking about, right? Like, maybe let's dive in a little bit more of what is that? I mean, that's a great place to start, a great image. But Eric, when you hear the word, and when you heard it first brought up, the sort of the art of accompaniment, let's get deeper into what does that mean, and how does that apply to our work as missionaries?
I mean, I love the imagery of accompanying good food with a glass of wine or two different dishes together, because then it kind of speaks to how each of those independently might be, delicious in and of itself. You put them together and it just becomes even like more of an experience of an enjoyment of the meal. And when we have the opportunity to grow in relationship and in friendship with each other, and when we consider the idea of accompanying another person closer to God, it's like our lives get enriched and their lives are enriched. And later on in the document, it says, and he's, Pope Francis, he says this and he understands us well. He says, although it sounds obvious, spiritual accompaniment must lead others ever closer to God, in whom we attain true freedom. And so when I think of accompaniment, I think of two people walking side by side, sharing life with each other, highs, lows, struggles, successes, and walking side by side, moving closer and closer towards God, and realizing the freedom that God provides in relationship with Him. So,
yeah. Wow. No, very cool. I love how you fleshed out the analogy even more about how both things are individual but are enhanced by the relationship with one another. And it's cool to think about how when we desire to bring people closer to God, in some way we are also brought closer to God, and perhaps by them we're brought closer to God. It's very interesting. One of the criticisms I think I've read in the interwebs was, is this idea of accompaniment too vague? Is it just like, oh, keep company and just be nice to people? But it's not that, as you're hitting on. It has an aim and a direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that direction is bringing people to Jesus. And that's what Proclaim is about. It's about helping disciples proclaim Jesus and bring people to Jesus. And you said it, Josh, it's not a project. It's people are not projects. Proclaim isn't a program. It's a movement of the Holy Spirit. And I think that's really important to recognize as well, that when we say accompaniment, we're not looking for a program to accompany another. And Pope Francis, again, he says it's an art. It's the art of learning and listening and sharing life with another person. Yeah.
Eric, maybe would you share a time where you saw yourself accompanied by another person in a way that helped you come closer to the Lord?
It's not necessary. Like, I'd love to share a couple examples, and it's funny because I think it's almost like a lost art in our world, and I think of a good friend of mine who when we were in university, we would find ways to get onto some sort of an adventure, whether it was like a rock climbing or kayaking or camping trip or whatever it was. And over time, our friendship and our brotherhood grew, and eventually it became more than just trying to find a common interest. And eventually it became, encouraging each other in learning how to live as a disciple of Jesus. And, I remember a couple of times, whether it was he or I having a bit of a challenge in life or in faith. And, it ended in late night conversations, like, 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, and we're just wrestling with things together. In addition to that, we did take some faith studies together and found ways where we could, be on retreat together or whatever it might be. And so I guess it's kind of a combination of, doing the things that can help us grow close together, doing things that could help us grow closer to God, and then sharing life with each other. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about when I was thinking about this is somebody I know in Vancouver anyways, I won't mention the parish, but somebody who was running Alpha there, and they had done the door-to-door invitation thing, and got someone who was a lapsed Catholic to come out and check it out, and who had a lot of reservations about the program as a whole, a lot of hesitations about aspects of what were being brought up, because he had essentially had heard some of this message and had decided this wasn't for him. And this friend, in addition to that, it wasn't just sort of like, come meet me on my terms in my parish hall, but they both had dogs, and he was like, well, hey, I walk my dog in this area. Would you like to just walk our dogs together sometime? And they really did strike up a friendship by that time. And I think it's kind of like what you're speaking to. There's this sort of common areas and spaces we can occupy in real friendship, authentic friendship with people outside of this maybe formal program of alpha or discovery or whatnot. So they realize it's not just, this person isn't just trying to get me to think like them or adopt their beliefs,
Yeah.
but they're actually extending me like true friendship. And that's a different place. Like that's a different, it's a kind of almost like a unconditional friendship is being offered here.
Yeah.
Even if you hate this program, I'm still happy to spend time with you, walk dogs, talk about stuff, and see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say this often in Proclaim and in our trainings, the discovery and alpha, quote unquote programs are more like tools that missionary disciples are privileged to have and to use in the art of accompaniment. I'm going to go back to Pope Francis and paragraph 171 now, because it's so rich and there's so much. And I think you kind of nailed on something here, which is an important skill in accompaniment, and that's the skill of listening. And this is what Pope Francis says. He says that we need to practice the art of listening, which is more than simply hearing. Listening in communication is an openness of heart, which makes possible that closeness without which genuine spiritual encounter cannot occur. So in our work as missionary disciples and in our disposition, we want to be listening to the other more than we're speaking. We want to be open to hearing what the heart is crying out for, and it's more than just hearing what they're saying. It's really listening to where their hearts are. And we know that all of us, being created in the image and likeness of God, are looking for fulfillment that only God can offer, community, relationship, that those things that bring freedom. I'm going to pause here, Josh, and just kind of throw it back to our listeners. And we want to listen to you too. So if you've got any questions on accompaniment, any thoughts that you want to throw out, anything that's really striking you, feel free to throw it in the comments section, and perhaps we might be able to kind of address it. Okay. There's a number of ways that I think Proclaim is looking to accompany its members, and we want to be able to do more of our Facebook Lives, but we want to be able to hear from you, and also grow our Facebook group in engagement, conversation, and be able to listen and to accompany. Now, Josh, you spent a little bit of your time in a variety of Facebook groups and in ministry, and have accompanied others in this sort of digital landscape. What's been some of the best practices and some of the things that you've seen have been useful in accompanying others through Facebook groups and in other digital means?
Yeah, no, great question, Eric. And it's funny because where I was going to speak to your last comment actually was a little bit of a caveat. It was that in the online realm, oftentimes it is hard to pick up on some of the subtleties of what someone is saying. That's why when you spend physical kind of incarnate time together with people in Alpha and Discovery, you can both hear the words that they're saying, but also see the tone with which they're saying it with. You can see their body language. You can understand whether there might be something more underneath it beyond what the strict text of what's being communicated is. And so when you are online, you have to bear that in mind, that there can be a real language barrier, even when we're speaking in the same language. But it also is a place which can be, John Paul said, truly human. When we make it a place where Christ is proclaimed, and so we can look to ways to help to close gaps. And sometimes, believe it or not, the corollary, which you wouldn't expect, is true. People might struggle to say certain things in person that they might be able to say in the right context online. Sometimes it's funny that way. And so we try to extend the hand really as much as we can to close the gaps as much as we can. A great example of how we can do that is what we're doing right now. I'm thousands of kilometers away from you. Some people who are tuning in will be spread far and wide across the diocese, and yet we're able to be almost like together.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm seeing a comment here, and this might be a good time to kind of look at that question, considering it looks like we might have lost Josh with some technical difficulties. So here it says, accompaniment can sound like a long-term commitment, but what about the spiritual conversation you might have with someone beside you on that plane? Is that accompaniment too? That's a great question. And I think when I think of that circumstance, we know that we may or may not have a lot of time with an individual sitting beside one on a plane. And I think the first thing that comes to mind, first and foremost, is to ask the Holy Spirit what kind of opportunity God is bringing to you in accompanying or perhaps leading someone to a conversation that might turn into something that's spiritual. And it's funny because immediately what comes to mind is I remember sitting beside a guy on a plane. He was a young adult, and sometimes what I'll do on the plane is start praying the rosary. And so I had my rosary beads out and was just praying. And he looked to me and he was like, "Oh, you're Catholic," and we began to have a conversation. He showed me a little medal that his mom had given to him. It might have been a miraculous medal, but I don't really remember. And that began a conversation. In that place, I think we can go back to what Pope Francis said about spending more time listening and less time talking in order to hear where one's heart might be. And in that moment, in listening to this gentleman's story, we were. I understood that he was looking for and seeking and wanting to grow in faith and is looking for a community. And so then that's when, I had the opportunity to invite him to join a young adult community that I knew was in the city that we were landing in. When we spend time listening, and I think we can have the opportunity to accompany even on the journey in a very short period of time, I think that listening gives us the information or perhaps the lay of the lands that can help us know what type of invitation we might make. So let's say we're sitting on that plane and the gentleman beside me looks and sees the rosary and then kind of turns away. Well, I think perhaps their heart may not be in a space or a place where an open conversation or an invitation might be relevant. Okay, Josh, I see you're connected online in the chat, but your video is gone. So it's now me talking to all of you without my good buddy Josh, and now I don't know where to go because he's the source of all wisdom, and well, the Holy Spirit is, but he's got so much good that we can glean from when it comes to accompaniment. Here's another quote from Evangelii Gaudium that I think could also help with that question of spiritual conversation, with someone on a plane. One who accompanies others has to realize that each person's situation before God and their life in grace are mysteries which no one can fully know from without. So we can't know what's going on in someone's hearts, from the outside looking in. And the art of accompaniment is, in fact, looking at the opportunity that we have, and what God might provide, and of course what they might be saying, and what might be stirring in their heart. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to some of the I guess current events that's happening around the world. And I think I've got a couple of thoughts I want to share when it comes to accompaniment in light of these current events. And I'm talking about COVID-19. I'm talking about the outbreak, the pandemic, the activities, the shutdown of activities, all of the different things that we're being bombarded with when it comes to the outbreak that we're experiencing here. And a number of questions have come into my office, and I'm sure Josh has heard some of these questions. And it's the question of, should I continue to host Alpha and Discovery, or continue to invite people into groups in light of COVID-19? And it's a valid question, and it's an important one. And certainly we should always be mindful and concerned about the other and their health and the safety of our communities and the safety of and the health of our families. And so I think it's really important to keep people in mind when we're considering either pausing our alpha programs or our discovery studies. And I just want to say that if you do that, it's totally okay. It's totally okay to pause, because it's so important for us to keep people in mind when we're considering our quote unquote programs. Okay, I was with a group earlier this week, and we had a chance to talk about programs. And there was a point in the conversation where I threw out and said, it's people who evangelize people. And at the end of paragraphs 173 in Pope Francis' Evangelii Gaudium, it says, missionary disciples accompany missionary disciples, which means that if there's a hiccup in our programs with Alpha or Discovery, and we're led to make a pause in our in our programs, well, we're still people, and the people we're accompanying are people, and we're concerned for their hearts, and we're concerned for their lives. And so if it ends up being that we pause some things for now, we're still on mission. There's no problem. The Holy Spirit has always known this is going to happen. He's got the plans in mind, and we do have an opportunity to to continue to pray for people, to love them where they're at, to find different ways to show that we are with them and that we love them, because missionary disciples accompany missionary disciples. If we don't have an opportunity to gather, if we don't have an opportunity to execute the best Alpha or Discovery, ultimately what leads people to Jesus is people. And at the same time, the responsibility of conversion lies with the Holy Spirit. And our job to be successful missionary disciples is to move as the Holy Spirit leads us, and to be concerned for the other. And right now, I would say a big concern for the other is in the health and safety of all of us. So be free, and be okay with making adjustments and pivoting in light of COVID-19. Okay. I'm seeing, it's Josh. Josh, thank you for throwing out a couple of the quotes from Evangelii Gaudium. I want to close with one more quote. It's in paragraph 173, and it says, genuine spiritual accompaniment always begins and flourishes in the context of service to the mission of evangelization. I want to say it again because I think it's so important. Genuine spiritual accompaniment always begins and flourishes in the context of service to the mission of evangelization. And so as you are in mission and in service of those who are in your proximate peripheries, and as you're accompanying them and listening to their hearts, I want you to know that Proclaim has that exact same disposition, that we are at the service of each and every one of you. So we want to continue to grow in listening to you, to hearing your needs and successes and challenges. And we want to continue to grow in accompanying you as you continue in the mission. So missionary disciples accompany missionary disciples. So we've wrapped up here. It's 1 o'clock. I want to make sure I honor that time. I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning of our Facebook Live. If you have other questions, please feel free to throw them in the comments, and we would be happy to either address them online, or if it becomes something that we might want to open up for another Facebook Live, we'd be more than willing to do that. So God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Take care of yourself. Take care of your families. Be safe, be healthy, and come Holy Spirit. Bye-bye.